do not know what happened there. I think I had a couple of live streams going at the same time. Anyway, we are here. She says, glugging her tea. Okay, so busy day today. What did I do? I have some mares that I'm breeding. That foal that I said was supposed to come on Sunday yesterday, that's still not arrived. So I'm still awaiting that little beggar to turn up. Yeah, breeding season is a busy time of year. So I'm on, I think it's still chapter 2, and it's chapter 3, and it's the fear chapter. We started this chapter last week, and the next heading that I'm getting to is the bottom of page 56, and it's fear of higher calorie foods. I don't think I need to tell you that people with anorexia generally have a problem eating high calorie foods. For many of us, lower calorie foods are safe and higher calorie foods are fear foods. These days, you can buy a burger or a pizza without expending a ton of energy to get it. Historically, though, higher calorie and fatty foods would have been much more difficult to attain. In order to eat meat, one would have to kill an animal. I mean, not necessarily, though, because you might have a tribe of people and someone would kill the animal, right? But yeah, you know what I mean. You know what I mean by that. It's like the collective you, isn't it? You would have to kill an animal. Whereas now, just go to the store. This is a large time investment. Can you imagine? Can you imagine hunting a freaking deer? It would be exhausting. And it would be quite a big time. And, you know, it's not just like going to the freezer now and getting something out of it. You'd have to be all prepared, clogged up. You'd have to have your little spears sharpened. Big investment. Dangerous and risky, as there's no guarantee that a day spent hunting will result in a kill. Oh, God. Hunting is even less likely to result in a kill than a family environment. I just want to stop there and say for a second that my livestock guardian dog, Breckenridge, killed a rabbit this morning. And I was both feeling sorry for the rabbit and intensely proud of him. Anyway, for this reason, I think that when migrating, it would make sense that the brain discourages you from the costly and risky activity of hunting meat. Because remember on this chapter, we're talking about sort of Shanghai Zinger's approach with the adaptive bee famine. Hence, a disincentive to eating highly caloric foods and an incentive for eating or grazing on less caloric, but easier to attain foods such as berries and forage. So you imagine, you're in a famine, the herd of wildebeest have gone off somewhere. Your brain is like, we got to be smart about this. We got to be smart. She can't spend the whole day trying to hunt a wildebeest that's not there. Like you spend the whole day trekking around the forest and then you're not finding them anyway. And so when you're looking for that high reward, high calorie, the meat thing, your brain's like, no. You can't do that in this environment. You've got to be satisfied with berries and shit like that. And you've got to move your ass and migrate. Don't spend your time going round and round in circles hunting. By the way, I very much doubt this was in Shanghai Zinger's theory. A lot of that, I took what her base was and then just thought about it a bit and thought about things that might make sense. And that sort of made sense to me. Certain species of pig do this too. It's called thin sow syndrome. When they lose weight, go into energy deficit, they start to move a lot. That's probably helpful, isn't it? Is that better? God, I'm on form today, aren't I? When they lose weight, they start to move a lot and refuse to eat their high-calorie grain. I mean, that's really interesting, isn't it? That happens with pigs. That when they start to go into energy deficit, they're like, don't want the high-fat stuff. I want the lower, they want the more harder to get at foragey. Bizarre. It's actually a problem with pigs. So I had 2 miniature pigs once. Don't even ask me why I did that. I thought it would be fun. It wasn't, because they came in quite bad condition and I could not get the fuckers to eat anything. Like I could not get them to eat. I was buying all of this pig food and one of them in particular just wouldn't eat. And I was like, would be me, wouldn't it? It would be me that gets an anorexic pig to look after. And it was a miniature pig at that. It was smaller than my dogs. And it was so stressful because honestly, with a person with an eating disorder, I can kind of talk to them. And, the pig, I couldn't even get it to eat. We ended up managing to get it to eat sweet corn. And so then we bought all the sweet corn in Costco. And my husband, he worked out the pig would only eat the sweet corn if he heated it up as well. Anyway, so then he was heating it. Anyway, we got weight back on the pig. But it was surreal having a pig that would eat. And once the pig got weight back on, it was just like, fine, we'd eat the pig food just as normal. So strange. Anyway, so yeah, when they lose weight, go into energy deficit, they start to move a lot and refuse to eat their high-calorie grain. Instead, they eat their low-calorie straw bedding. It's rather similar to the preference for eating low-calorie foods when you have anorexia, don't you think? Why would a pig who is losing weight stop eating grain and start eating straw and pacing? Because they're trying to migrate. This is a quote. I used to feel compelled to walk up and down the hospital corridor. I had no idea why I wanted to do this. And that's RB, who was an adult in recovery from anorexia. Turns out I have a ton in common with these pigs. If I go into energy deficit, it's so funny and true. I have a lot in common with a pig. All right, here's a quote from Nishan Geisinger. Your fear of eating is not because you are vain. Your weight suddenly feels like life or death because once it was for your ancestors. You have anorexia genes because your ancestors survived by resisting their hunger and moving. Gaining a pound means that you have failed to resist your hunger and move enough. Anorexia makes gaining a pound feel like the worst thing. It steals your future to help you migrate today because it was migrate or die. Why does fear override logical thinking? That's the next header. I know that you are asking yourself at this stage in reading all this, okay, so my brain thinks it's migrating, but surely logical thinking can tell my brain that I'm not really in a famine. Surely part of my brain knows that there's plenty of food around, really, and hence no need to migrate. Your survival brain doesn't work like that. This is a quote from somebody called Carl Sagan, and it's from Cosmos. Deep inside the skull of every one of us, there is something like a brain of a crocodile. Surrounding the R complex is the limbic system, or mammalian brain, which evolved tens of millions of years ago in ancestors who were mammal but not yet primates. It's a major source of our moods and emotions, of our concern and our care for the young. And finally, on the outside, living in an uneasy truce with the more primitive brains beneath, is the cerebral cortex. Civilization is a product of the cerebral cortex. So it's just, a way of saying that primal part of your brain it's real. It's a thing. The brainstem area is your survival brain. It deals with things like food, safety, and sex. Should have said reproduction, but whatever. If your survival brain feels threatened, it will react without consulting the cerebral cortex. That's the rational thinking part of your brain. Your brainstem area reacts, doesn't think. Our brains, as we know them, now evolved from the brainstem. Our brains as we know them now evolved from the brainstem. Some animals, such as reptiles, only have a brainstem area. Hence, it's often referred to as the reptilian brain. Your reptilian brain is preverbal. It controls incredibly important functions such as breathing, heart rate, and the fight, flight, or freeze response that we have when we perceive a threat. Brainstem impulses and urges are reflexes. They're instinctual. Probably sounds very familiar to you if you have anorexia or any other restrictive eating disorder. Staying alive is primitive brain stuff. It reminds me of the Bee Gees, doesn't it? Staying alive. Anyway, not executive functioning stuff. Fear protects us from death. That's an interesting sentence. Fear protects us from death. Because I guess it does. If your brain perceives a threat to your existence, it wants to get you the hell out of danger. Hence, it doesn't mess around asking the prefrontal cortex to sign off on the fight, flight, or freeze response. In a sense, we become a little daft when we're scared. We can't think logically. Everything boils down to fight, I'll kill you rather than eat that. Flight, I'm running away so I don't have to eat more. Or freeze, I can't move or make a decision either way. I bet those are familiar to some of you. While your logical brain knows that there's a McDonald's in every corner, that's irrelevant because your brainstem isn't consulting your logical brain when it triggers the threat response to food. All it knows is that you went into energy deficit, and this signals that you're in a famine environment. Remember, the brainstem doesn't think, it reacts to data. Lack of food coming in is data to support the notion that food is scarce in your environment. It has reacted to your state of energy deficit by triggering the anorexia response to save you by making your primary focus in life eating less and moving, i.e. migrating. Your brainstem doesn't give two hoots about what your cerebral cortex thinks, as it hasn't perceived a threat and is hence overriding all other, as it has perceived a threat and is hence overriding all other brain responses other than migrate to where there's more food. The good news is that while you cannot control this fear-based response from happening, you can control your reaction to it. The toolkit section of this book provides exercises that will help you do just this. Honestly, can't remember what's in the toolkit. Guess we'll find out. So what we're getting from that is, when you're in fight or flight, you're not thinking that clearly. We react. So our fight or flight, or our sympathetic nervous system, is reactionary, right? You see a spider and you react before you think. That's by design. That's really important, because if you sat there and thought without reacting when there is a genuine threat, then that threat might kill you. And so those are humans that reacted before thinking. That's who have evolved. And so that's why we have that very much reaction, not thinking. And so a lot of the time we can be frustrated by our eating disorder because we're just like, what the fuck, am I stupid or something? I used to think that all the time. I'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with me? All I have to do is eat more food and stop running around like an idiot. And then I knew that. My thinking brain knew that, but I was still reacting to my fear response, as we are designed to do. So you have to have a little bit of compassion for yourself, because this shit's hard. Okay, next little heading is brain tantrums. Do not expect your brain to be on board with recovery at all times, or any of the time. If recovery were easy, or I'd not written a book about it, when you're in energy deficit and anorexia is active, your brain will interpret eating more as a threat to your survival. It will use negative emotions and panic to try and motivate you not to eat more. No amount of talking about why you should eat more, and no amount of science is going to stop your brain from freaking out if you eat more. This is because the fear response is coming from your reptile brain, and this will override logical thinking. So don't we all do that? I did that all the time. I'd be like, if I just read the scientific study on why actually fat is good for me and why I should eat it, then I'll be fine with eating fat and I'll feel it's all right. Didn't work. I could read all the science in the world that actually said, actually fat is good for you and really important nutrient. And I still would have a fear response to eating it. That's because my reptile brain doesn't give a shit about that or science or anything else. It's just like, we're getting out of here. Bye. Okay. Bullet point. You're going to have to eat more even while your brain is screaming blue murder about it. Second bullet point, you're going to have to eat more even when it feels like the wrong thing to do. Eating more is going to feel wrong, but it's right. In order to recover, you have to eat a lot of food even while your brain is screaming at you not to. This is the process of rewiring the brain that we are going to be working on in this book. Teaching your brain to drop the neural pathways that associate eating with a fear response and stopping the fight or flight reaction. If you guys have any questions on any of that, or you don't feel clear, write it in the box now, because I want to make sure that we are kind of clear on how that's working. Tip. When eating is really scary, focus on the mechanics of eating rather than listening to the fear that your brain is throwing out. I used to focus on my hand holding my fork and putting my fork into my mouth, chew, swallow, repeat, whilst also using anything and everything, TV, crosswords, books, puzzles, as a mental distraction while I performed the physical actions of eating. You don't need your brain on board in order to chew and swallow. Your brain may be freaking out and you can still mechanically go through the physical process of eating food. I know this because I've done it many times. Yeah, I used to Sudoku puzzles as well as crosswords. So I'd always have like television on, a Sudoku puzzle or a crossword, and I didn't at the time know what I was doing, but what I was doing by doing that is I was trying to keep my brain in my parasympathetic nervous system. That's the thinking one. That's the rest and digest one. That's the cognitive one. And we can't be in both nervous systems at once. And so if you think you're going into your sympathetic nervous system, that's the fight or flight. If you can do something that will bring you back into your parasympathetic nervous system, you'll start to calm down and you'll start to be more rational. Now, the sympathetic nervous system is not the type of nervous system that does crosswords or Sudoku puzzles. So if I put a crossword or a Sudoku puzzle in front of myself, it's like it pulls the brain out of the sympathetic nervous system because you're making your brain think. And when it starts to think, you're getting back into the safe zone again in terms of forcing your brain into your parasympathetic nervous system. So it can be really helpful. I found that really helpful. That's probably in the toolkit. Next header, neuroplasticity and the brain. Rewiring entrenched behaviors. Learning that the brain is neuroplastic was a game changer for me in terms of recovery. I have been interested in yoga and meditation since my early teens, but when I first found a book on it that belonged to my mother, I didn't really begin to put all these pieces together as to how meditation had been relevant to my own recovery until I moved to Boulder, Colorado. Boulder is a town where meditation and mindfulness are so commonplace that you actually can't find a place to sit in a park and eat a hot dog without tripping over somebody meditating. So fucking true. In Boulder, every takeaway coffee comes with a side of namaste. Also true. Even a cynic like me picked up a load of meditation concepts in the first year I was here. And in doing so, I began to understand that many of these mindfulness techniques were things I had intuitively been doing in recovery in order to try and keep myself calm and focused in the face of fear. I just will say, by the way, Boulder is not a great place for a person recovering from an eating disorder. It is rife with eating disorders. I think that Boulder, Colorado University has the highest incidence of eating disorders of any university in the USA. Anyway, lots of cool mindfulness techniques have been developed in and around Boulder. Neurosculpting, trademarked, is an example of one of them. Its founder, Lisa Wimberger, describes neurosculpting as the fusion of brain science and mindfulness, so even the most insidious mental beliefs can be rewritten. Her technique is taking the functional aspects of meditation and putting them to exercises that people can use to transform their own default settings. Pretty nifty and similar to the thought processes that I have been using in my own recovery. It turns out the little mental exercises I've been doing in recovery were examples of neural rewiring techniques. I just hadn't known it. You know what? The God-honest truth of it is that meditating in its traditional sense is fucking boring. So I'm not actually an advocate of doing that unless it works for you. It doesn't work for me. However, we don't have to sit on what's one of those little pincushions called that people meditate on. I forgot what they're called. But we don't have to sit on one of those for hours to achieve a lot of the benefits that really simple and the sort of functional aspects of meditation can get to us. My interest in rewiring and recovering from trauma led me to take a yoga for trauma course. And I was interested in it not because I had trauma, but because I was interested in it. And there I went on to found and run a non-profit organization that taught yoga to trauma populations for free. For 4 years, I taught restorative yoga and breathing techniques in women's safe houses, homeless shelters, to at-risk teens, veterans, and in substance abuse rehabilitation houses. I've got some stories from that, I could tell you. I taught over 1,000 yoga for trauma classes in those 4 years, and it was a wonderful time of inspirational learning for me. What I learned about myself and witnessed in others is that you can change the default way in which your neurons fire by changing your behaviors and not reacting in a way that confirms undesirable thought patterns. Learning how people rewire trauma experiences also helped me to understand why I've been able to recover from anorexia the way that I did, and the importance of what I did. You see, even though I didn't realize at the time, what I was really doing when I forced myself to eat all the foods I was scared of in recovery and break all the anorexia-generated rules was adding neural rewiring to nutritional rehabilitation. I began to understand that my recovery worked because I did both. If I had nutritionally rehabilitated by eating safe foods and keeping all of my anorexia food rules in place, they likely would have persisted. Years and years of thinking and acting with anorexia had left me with a mental roadmap that meant unless I challenged and rejected these behaviors, I would still wind up doing them. Why are anorexia-generated behaviors become so hardwired? Well, I think that if anorexia is a reaction to a perceived famine, the migration response, when it evolved, would have only been required to last long enough to get you to the lands of abundant food, a couple of weeks, maybe months at the most. Not really long enough for the behaviors that serve migration to become entrenched. A feast would then happen, and this would, when you get to where the land of plenty is, a feast would then happen, and this would have been the signal to the brain that the famine was over. Job done, you moved, you're out of danger, get on with life. In our current environment, diet culture is putting people into energy deficit while food is abundant. This means that there is no natural endpoint to signal that the famine is over. Hence, some of us are migrating for years. Apparently, habits are formed in the basal ganglia part of the brain. The repeated behaviors of eating very little and moving a lot start to form very strong neural pathways in our brains. These become entrenched behaviors. The neural pathways that lead to these behaviors can often become very solid. Hence, the behaviors are hard to break and often feel like the default setting feels like brick walls. Doesn't that feel familiar? They can become so entrenched and strong that they don't feel optional, but they are. And with determination and support, you can break them. This is one of the catch-22s of anorexia recovery and any restrictive eating disorder, I'll add. You can put on weight, you can get out of energy deficit, but all of those neural pathways and behaviors are still in place. They are going to pull you back into energy deficit again. We need to rewire and get out of energy deficit. I rewired anorexia neural pathways and developed new ones by constantly thinking and doing thoughts and actions that strengthen my desired neural freedom map. While habits are very hard to break, you do have some executive control over them. Time spent repeating new recovery-type behaviors, and that old infrastructure will become forgotten, rusty, overgrown, and therefore less potential to harm me. Many of the exercises in the toolkit section of this book focus on helping you do just that, and many of them are exercises I instinctively developed in recovery. Understanding neuroplasticity brought the glorious realization that I have the power and the ability to switch my default operating system back from the one that energy deficit pushed it into. But I also understood that to do that, I would have to achieve energy balance in order to counter the years of energy deficit. And while I was still on anorexia's operating system, eating and gaining weight would feel wrong and frightening in the process. Understanding that the things I would have done would have to do with feel alien to me helped me tolerate doing them while I was in this process. Summary. Like the code in your computer, the code in your brain can be rewired with a combination of behavioral and mental operations. You know, all of that sounds, it kind of makes it sound a little bit more complicated than it is sometimes, I think. It's not particularly complicated. When you do something over and over again, you build neural pathways, and then your brain thinks that that's what you need to keep on doing. And in order to change that, we have to change the behavior first. So if we change the behavior first, then the thoughts will follow. Sounds backwards, but it's true. If we change the way that, because a lot of the time we just think, we don't really understand that our behaviors inform our thoughts. And so we're sort of coming at things backwards a lot of the time. We think if I change my thinking, then my behaviors will change. And so you sit there reciting mantras to yourself over and over again, and then wonder why you're still getting up and doing the same damn things that you know you're not supposed to be doing. And that was one of my biggest frustrations. Like every evening I'd be like, this is it. I'm not going running tomorrow. I'm doing recovery. I give myself that pep talk. And guess what? Every morning I'd wake up and I'd go running again. And I'd start the same damn cycle over and over again. Because I was relying on my thoughts to make that behavior change seem easy. And when the behavior change didn't seem easy, I was just like, well, I guess I'll go running. We have to do it differently. We have to focus on the behaviors, and we have to focus on stopping disordered behaviors, stopping on behaviors that are about energy deficit. And from there, that is actually what is going to change our thought patterns and start that neural rewiring process for you. And simply put, and I often say this to my clients, is if you want a really simple way of looking at it, if you want to stop behaving like a crazy person, you need to stop behaving like a crazy person. That's what I used to say to myself. I was like, if I want to stop behaving like a freak, I need to stop behaving like a freak. It sounds so simple when you put it like that. But it took me a really long time to actually put it into practice. Okay, so I'm just going to make a quick start on chapter 4. It's chapter 4, Anorexia and Your Core Beliefs. And there's a picture in this. There's this picture, and it's like one of those, I forget what he calls it. Like if I look at that picture, I just see this woman with her head turned away. But I think some people see something different that I can't for the life of me see. It's one of those things like once you've seen it one way, you can't see it the other way unless you are told what you're supposed to be seeing. So maybe it'll say what I'm supposed to be seeing in the text. Oh, you're supposed to be able to see a young woman. I can't see the damn young woman at all. Oh, no. I do see the young woman. I see it's the young woman looking away. I don't see the old woman. No, I don't see the old woman at all. Anyway, when I first looked at this, I could only see the young woman. I can only see the young woman now. I knew that there was an alternative perspective, but I absolutely could not see it. Like, can you see the young woman? Look, it looks like a young woman with like a black hair thing looking to the right, looking over her shoulder. So looking over her right shoulder. Where's the old bloody woman? Oh, I can see the old woman now. It looks like, with the old woman, oh, that's hard to do. That is her nose. That's like her crooked nose. And that is her mouth. And then she's got like this shawl over her eyes, and that's her hair. Whew. When I first looked at this, I didn't see the young woman. I absolutely could not see it. I had to Google the old woman version and follow written instructions how to see the old woman. Well, I sort of had to do that again now, didn't I? Even then, it took me at least 20 minutes to be able to see the alternative version of the picture. Oh, I've written tips. Tip: the chin of the young woman makes up the nose of the old woman. Yes, I can see that now. Once the brain has decided on the version of the truth, it can take a lot of work to shift that. So fucking true. It's a real problem with being human, honestly. Our brains hold these belief systems, and once your brain has got a belief system, your brain does not want to change it. Your perception creates your reality, and your beliefs and mental constructs create your perception. That's why two people can look at the same picture and see different people. That's why eyewitnesses can watch the video camera of an incident and see different agents of fault. Even more interestingly, once your brain is settled on a perception about anything, be it a picture or political belief, it can be exceedingly difficult to see it the other way. So homework for this week, think about that. Just question your beliefs. It's such an interesting process to do that. Things that you believe to be true, when they just come up in your brain, just think, really? Is that really true? What if it wasn't? Your brain won't like it. You'll notice that. Your brain's like, shut up. No, just shut up. Just shut up. Leave it. Just leave it. Just keep on prodding it and see. Okay, so Stig says, do you have an average time span where people start to get less stressed about eating or stopping disorder behaviors? I'm currently dealing with guilt because I feel like I got over my panic quickly. I hope that makes sense. English isn't your first language. I tell you what, your English is almost better than mine, and English is my first language. Yes. Well, the reality is, I hate doing things like this because then there'll always be someone who's an outlier, and then they're like, oh, you said this, and we're all different, okay? So I'm just putting that out there. But for most people, if you really go for the neural rewiring, like really go for it in the same way that you would go for it if you were cramming for an exam, but you are throwing yourself into these situations where you're just overriding a fear response, overriding a fear response, overriding a fear response. Most people will find a reduction in their fear response within 3 to 5 days of doing that. I'll go into why that is more later, but to answer your question, in my experience, most people start to feel their fear response, those emotional reactions, coming down around 3 to 5 days after they started recovery, if they're really going hell for leather. If they're not going hell for leather, then evidently it's going to take a bit longer because, if you cram your brain with information, it's going to learn that information quicker. Whereas if you are less frequent with the revision of that information, it's going to take longer for your brain to learn that. And so you said you feel guilt because you thought you got over your panic quickly. No. You might find that what most people find is their fear response starts to come down as it pertains to the situations that they're in frequently. But then if you go and you're in a situation where it's not a situation that you've yet come across since you started recovery, then you'll notice a spike in that emotional fear response again. So say, for example, if you've started recovery and you've just been at home the whole time and you've been eating all your fear foods, you'll notice a reduction in your fear response as it pertains to that situation. But you might find that if you then went out and ate at someone else's house or went and ate at a restaurant, it would spike up again. But then as you keep on going out to restaurants, then it will come down in that environment as well. Okay, so I'm going to put up on the community thingy, I'm going to put your questions here for Friday, what was the date on Friday? The date on Friday is Friday the 7th. So I'm going to put on the community tab, I'm going to put your questions here for Friday the 7th live, and I'll answer those. And then I'm going to start this from page 68 next Monday. Thank you, everybody, for being there. I hope you have a really, really wonderful week.